The rain was punishing the city when a cruel act was committed. A man believed he had gotten rid of a problem by throwing an elderly person off the bridge, but he didn't know that a pair of watchful eyes witnessed everything. What happened next was simply unbelievable. Before hearing this exciting story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more impressive stories. The night was rainy, and the city was practically deserted. The wind howled between buildings, and the weak lights from the lampposts barely illuminated the imposing bridge over a turbulent river. Under that gloomy climate, a 72-year-old elderly man found himself in despair, holding with difficulty onto the coat of a younger man. His eyes were full of fear, but the coldness of the aggressor showed no mercy. The impact with the freezing water was violent. The elderly man fought against the current, his aged hands desperately seeking something to grab onto. That's when he felt something pulling at his clothes. A stray dog had jumped into the water to save him. With surprising strength, the animal dragged him to the shore, where both collapsed exhausted. Richard, the rescued elderly man, could hardly believe what had happened. While catching his breath, he observed his unlikely savior, a dog with dark fur and deeply intelligent eyes. The animal wouldn't leave his side, as if it understood the gravity of the situation. A driver passing on the nearby road stopped to help them. Seeing the deplorable state of the soaked gentleman and dog, he immediately took them to the nearest hospital. Throughout the journey, the stray remained alert, eyes fixed on the road, as if looking for something or someone. At the Ejat hospital while being treated, Richard couldn't stop thinking about the reason for that attack. As chairman of the board of shareholders of one of the country's largest technology companies, he knew he had enemies, but never imagined it would come to this point. What intrigued him most, however, was that mysterious dog that had appeared out of nowhere to save him. In the days that followed, while recovering, Richard received a visit from his only daughter, Sarah, who had rushed back from a business trip in London. The reunion was emotional but charged with tension. Sarah couldn't understand how her father, always so cautious, had put himself in such a dangerous situation. "Dad, you need to tell me exactly what happened," insisted Sarah, holding her father's hand tightly. "So who would do something like this to you?" Richard sighed deeply before answering. "Daughter, in recent weeks I discovered some irregularities in the company accounts. Important documents began to mysteriously disappear, and suspicious transfers were made without authorization. When I started investigating further, I received anonymous threats. The dog, which had managed to stay in the hospital thanks to Richard's insistence, perked up its ears upon hearing the conversation. Its behavior was so peculiar that even the doctors commented on its unusual intelligence." Sarah frowned, concerned. "Why didn't you tell me before? We could have taken precautions, hired security." "I didn't want to worry you," Richard replied, stroking the head of the dog that wouldn't leave his side. "Besides, I never imagined someone would go to such extremes, but now with this animal by my side I feel safer. It's as if he understands everything that's happening." The stray, which Richard decided to call Guardian, looked at him with expressive eyes as if confirming his words. Sarah observed the scene with a mixture of concern and fascination. There was something different about that dog, something she couldn't explain. That night, while Richard slept, Sarah decided to investigate on her own. As vice president of international operations for the company, she had access to privileged information. Sitting on the sofa in the hospital room with her laptop, she began searching through the financial records of the past few months. Guardian, lying at the foot of Richard's bed, kept one eye open, observing every movement. The dog seemed to understand that this investigation was important and that the dangers had not yet passed. Occasionally, its ears would move as it caught sounds from the hallway, always alert to any threat. What Sarah discovered that night left her sleepless. The irregularities were much larger than her father had realized and involved powerful people within the company itself. But one discovery in particular made her blood run cold. She found evidence that the attack on her father hadn't been an isolated case. Other executives who began investigating the irregularities had also suffered mysterious accidents. Guardian sensed the change in energy in the room and approached Sarah, placing his head in her lap as if wanting to comfort her. She looked at the dog, then at her sleeping father, and made a decision. She needed to act. Quickly but cautiously. Someone was willing to do anything to keep that scheme running, and now she knew that her father was still in danger. The next morning, the hospital room was the scene of a tense meeting. Sarah, with deep dark circles under her eyes, shared her discoveries with Richard. The elderly man listened to everything in silence, his wrinkled face contracting in an expression of growing concern. "Daughter, this is much bigger than we imagined," Richard finally said, his voice low and tired. "We need to be extremely careful with our next steps." Guardian, sitting next to the bed, seemed to absorb every word of the conversation. His attentive eyes moved between father and daughter, as if trying to decipher the complexity of the situation. Sarah nodded, running her hand through her hair in a gesture of frustration. "Dad, I think it's time we involve the authorities. This goes beyond simple corporate fraud." Richard hesitated. "It's not that simple, Sarah. Some of the people involved have powerful connections. If we act precipitously, we could put more lives at risk." At that moment, Guardian abruptly stood up, his ears perked. Seconds later, someone knocked on the door. It was Michael, Richard's personal assistant for over 2 decades. "Mr. Richard, what a relief to see that you're well," exclaimed Michael, entering the room. His eyes, however, showed more than just concern. Sarah noticed something strange in Guardian's behavior. The dog, usually friendly, was showing its teeth to Michael, emitting a low growl. "Easy, boy," Richard tried to calm the animal, but Guardian wouldn't take his eyes off the newcomer. Michael seemed uncomfortable with the presence of the dog. "Mr. Richard, I came as soon as I heard about the incident. The board is in an uproar. We need to discuss how to handle the press and—" "Michael," Richard interrupted him. "For now, no statements to the press. We need to better understand what's happening before any official pronouncement." Sarah observed the interaction with growing suspicion. Something in Michael's behavior didn't seem natural. It was as if he were more concerned with the repercussions of the incident than with Richard's well-being. "Dad," she intervened, "I think it's better if we discuss this later. You need to rest now." Michael seemed displeased but agreed to leave. Before leaving, he cast one last look at Guardian, who was still growling softly. After Michael's departure, Sarah turned to her father. "Did you notice something strange in his behavior?" Richard sighed deeply. "Michael has worked with me for so long, but I confess that in recent months, some of his attitudes have left me intrigued." Guardian, now calmer, approached Richard, placing his head in his lap. The elderly man stroked the animal's fur, thoughtful. "You know, Sarah," Richard began, his voice loaded with nostalgia, "this dog reminds me a lot of Thunder, that stray we had when you were a child. Do you remember him?" Sarah smiled, recalling the family's old companion. "How could I forget? Thunder was incredible. I remember once he—" She stopped abruptly, a sudden memory emerging in her mind. "Dad, do you remember that time when Thunder prevented a robbery at our house? He managed to smell the intruder before he even entered." Richard nodded, his eyes shining with the memory. "Yes, that dog had a sixth sense for danger. Very similar to our friend here," he said, looking at Guardian. Sarah remained silent for a moment, an idea forming in her mind. "Dad, what if Guardian isn't just an ordinary dog? What if he has some connection to what's happening?" Richard looked at her, intrigued. "What do you mean?" "Think about it," Sarah continued, excited about her theory. "He appeared out of nowhere to save you, seems to understand everything we say, and clearly didn't like Michael. What if he's here for a specific reason?" Richard reflected on his daughter's words. It was a crazy theory, but after everything that had happened, nothing seemed impossible. "Maybe you're right," he finally said. "But how can we be sure?" At that moment, Guardian got up and walked to the window of the room, looking fixedly outside. Sarah approached to see what had caught the animal's attention. In the hospital parking lot, she saw Michael talking agitatedly, so on the phone gesturing nervously. Something in his posture indicated that it wasn't a normal work conversation. "Dad," Sarah called, "I think we need to investigate Michael more deeply. And maybe Guardian can help us with that." Richard nodded, his expression serious. You're right, daughter, but we need to be extremely cautious. If Michael is really involved in this plot, he might just be the tip of the iceberg. Guardian returned to the bedside, his intelligent eyes fixed on Richard and Sarah. It was as if he understood the gravity of the situation and was ready to help. "Well, it seems we have a new ally in our investigation," Richard said, smiling at the dog. "Now, we need to devise a plan." Sarah took her laptop, determined. "I'll start digging through Michael's emails and records. Maybe we'll find some clue about who else is involved." As father and daughter began to plan their next steps, Guardian remained alert, his sharp senses catching every movement in the hospital corridor. The investigation was just beginning, and the danger, far from having passed, seemed to be approaching ever closer. The following days were ones of intense activity for Sarah. While Richard recovered in the hospital, she delved deep into the investigation, dividing her time between visits to her father and long hours poring over documents and digital records of the company. Guardian, for his part, rarely left Richard's side. The bond between the elderly man and the dog seemed to strengthen each day, as if they shared a silent secret. On a particularly tense afternoon, Sarah entered the hospital room with a grave expression. "Dad, I found something you need to see." She opened her laptop and showed Richard a series of emails exchanged between Michael and an unknown address. The messages, coded, made reference to eliminating obstacles and silencing inconvenient voices. Richard turned pale. "My God, Sarah, this is evidence of conspiracy," she completed. "And there's more. I managed to track some of the suspicious transfers. They're linked to an offshore company in the Cayman Islands." Guardian, who had been sleeping at the foot of the bed, abruptly stood up, as if sensing the tension in the air. His attentive eyes fixed on the computer screen. "What will we do now?" asked Richard, his voice trembling. Sarah closed the laptop, thoughtful. "I think it's time we involved someone trustworthy from the authorities. We can't handle this alone." At that moment, Guardian began barking insistently, running to the door of the room. Seconds later, they heard footsteps rapidly approaching down the corridor. The door opened, revealing Michael, breathless and visibly agitated. "Mr. Richard, we need to talk urgently." Sarah positioned herself protectively between Michael and her father, while Guardian growled softly, the fur on his neck bristling. "Michael, what's going on?" asked Richard, trying to remain calm. The assistant hesitated, his eyes nervously moving between Richard, Sarah, and the dog. I can't continue with this anymore. I need to tell the truth." Sarah crossed her arms, distrustful. "What truth?" "Michael." He breathed deeply before starting. "I was coerced into participating in this scheme. They threatened my family if I didn't cooperate. But after what happened to Mr. Richard, I can no longer remain silent." Richard and Sarah exchanged surprised looks. Guardian, meanwhile, seemed to evaluate every word from Michael, his ears moving subtly. "Who's behind all this, Michael?" asked Richard, his voice firm despite the shock. Michael swallowed hard. "It's Victor Reynolds, the financial vice president. He's the mastermind behind the entire scheme." Sarah let out an exclamation of surprise. Victor was known for his impeccable reputation and his philanthropic work. The idea that he could be involved in something so sordid seemed surreal. "Are you sure about this, Michael?" questioned Sarah, still skeptical. "Absolutely," responded Michael, his voice trembling. "He has powerful connections, including with some people in the government. The scheme is much bigger than you imagine." Richard closed his eyes for a moment, absorbing the information. When he opened them again, there was a renewed determination in his gaze. "Michael, we need your help to expose all of this." Guardian, who until then had maintained a defensive posture, surprisingly approached Michael, curiously sniffing him. The gesture didn't go unnoticed by Sarah. "It's amazing how this dog seems to understand everything," she commented, observing the interaction. Michael looked at Guardian with a strange expression, almost of recognition. "You know, there's something familiar about him. He reminds me a lot of that dog you had years ago." Richard and Sarah exchanged significant looks. The mention of Thunder didn't seem to be mere coincidence. "Michael," Richard began cautiously, "what exactly do you know about this dog?" The assistant hesitated as if weighing his words. Maybe he's not just an ordinary dog. The silence that followed was charged with tension and expectation. Guardian, as if understanding that he was the center of the conversation, sat between them all, his intelligent eyes moving from one face to another. Sarah was the first to break the silence. "What do you mean by that, Michael? What do you know about Guardian?" Michael ran his hand over his face, visibly nervous. "You won't believe it, but there are rumors in the company about a secret project, a project involving advanced animal intelligence." Richard leaned forward, intrigued. "Go on." The project was led by a brilliant scientist, Dr. Parker. He believed it was possible to drastically increase the intelligence of animals, especially dogs, through a combination of genetic engineering and nanotechnology. Sarah looked at Guardian, who seemed to be listening attentively. "Are you suggesting that Guardian is a result of this project?" Michael nodded slowly. "It's possible. Dr. Parker disappeared mysteriously a few months ago, right after reporting a significant breakthrough in his research. Nobody knows what happened to him or to the animals from the project." Richard stroked Guardian's head, thoughtful. "That would explain a lot. His unusual intelligence, how he appeared out of nowhere to save me." "But why would he be here?" questioned Sarah. "And how does this connect with the corruption scheme in the company?" Michael shook his head. "I'm not sure, but I suspect Victor Reynolds has something to do with Dr. Parker's disappearance. Maybe the project discovered something that threatened his plans." Guardian, as if wanting to confirm the suspicions, stood up and went to Sarah's backpack. With his muzzle, he insistently nudged a side pocket. Intrigued, Sarah opened the pocket and found a small flash drive that she didn't remember putting there. "What is this?" Richard looked at Guardian with amazement. "It seems our friend here has more secrets than we imagined." Sarah connected the flash drive to her laptop, with everyone anxiously observing. What they would find could be the key to unraveling the entire mystery, and potentially put them in even more danger. As the contents of the flash drive loaded, Guardian kept his eyes fixed on the screen, as if eagerly waiting for the revelation of a long-kept secret. The hospital room, once a place of recovery, was now transformed into the epicenter of a conspiracy much larger than any of them could have imagined. The silence in the hospital room was palpable as the contents of the flash drive loaded on Sarah's laptop. Richard, Sarah, Michael, and even Guardian seemed to hold their breath, anticipating what was about to be revealed. Finally, a folder opened on the screen, filled with files with coded names. Sarah clicked on the first file, revealing a detailed document about Project Sentinel, the official name of Dr. Parker's research. "My God," whispered Sarah, her eyes quickly scanning the text. "This is incredible. Dr. Parker managed to not only increase dogs' intelligence, but also create a kind of telepathic link between them and specific humans." Richard looked at Guardian, who kept his eyes fixed on the screen. That would explain a lot about his behavior. Michael, visibly nervous, approached to see better. "Is there anything about the doctor's disappearance?" Sarah continued navigating through the files. "Yes, here, an incident report. Apparently Dr. Parker discovered that someone planned to use his research for military purposes. He refused to cooperate and—" She stopped abruptly, turning pale. "He was threatened. The report mentions a VR who visited him with a proposal. When the doctor refused, VR promised consequences." "Victor Reynolds," murmured Richard, connecting the dots. Guardian let out a low growl upon hearing the name, as if confirming the suspicion. Sarah opened another file, this time a video. In it, a middle-aged man, presumably Dr. Parker, spoke directly to the camera. "If you're seeing this, it means my suspicions were correct and I am no longer available. Project Sentinel was a success beyond my most optimistic expectations. But it also attracted the attention of dangerous people. I cannot allow my research to be used to cause harm. Therefore, I have taken measures to protect the dogs and the data." The doctor paused, looking off-screen for a moment, before continuing. "I encoded the most crucial information in the DNA of the dogs themselves. Each carries a part of the puzzle. Together, they are the key to unlocking the full potential of the project. But most importantly, they were trained to seek out and protect key people who can prevent the misuse of this technology. Richard and Sarah exchanged looks of astonishment, turning to Guardian, who seemed to be paying as much attention to the video as they were. Dr. Parker continued, "If you found this flash drive, you were probably guided by one of the dogs. Trust him, he chose you for a reason. Together you can uncover the truth and prevent Project Sentinel from falling into the wrong hands." The video ended abruptly, leaving the room in stunned silence. "This is surreal." Michael was the first to speak, his voice trembling slightly. Sarah turned to Guardian, who was staring at her with his intelligent eyes. "So you chose us, but why? What exactly are we supposed to do?" In response, Guardian approached the laptop and, to everyone's astonishment, used his paw to navigate to a specific file, opening it with incredible precision. The file contained a list of names and addresses. At the top of the list was Richard Thompson, chairman of the board. "Their targets," concluded Richard, his voice grave. "Victor must be planning to eliminate everyone who could oppose his plans." Sarah nodded, her mind working quickly. "And Guardian came to protect us and help us expose all of this." Michael, who had been quiet, stepped forward. "There's one more thing you need to know. Victor isn't acting alone. He has connections with a powerful group, people from high levels of government and major corporations. They call themselves the Circle." Richard frowned. "The Circle? I've heard rumors about them, but I always thought it was just a conspiracy theory." "It's very real," affirmed Michael, "and they will do anything to maintain their power and influence." Sarah closed the laptop, her expression determined. "Well, now we have concrete evidence. We need to act quickly before they realize we know." Guardian barked once as if agreeing and ran to the door of the room, looking back as if calling them to follow him. "I think our friend has a plan," said Richard, trying to get up from the bed. Sarah gently stopped him. "Dad, you still need to recover. I'll go with Guardian. Michael, you stay here and take care of my father, and stay alert for any suspicious movement." Michael nodded, although he seemed nervous about the idea of staying behind. Before leaving, Sarah turned to her father. "I promise I'll be careful. We're going to expose these criminals and clear the company's name." Richard smiled, proud but worried. "I trust you, daughter, and for some reason I also trust this extraordinary dog." Sarah grabbed her bag, carefully storing the laptop and flash drive. She looked at Guardian, who was alert and ready to depart. "Okay, friend, show me the way." As they left the room, Sarah couldn't help but think about how drastically her life had changed in just a few days. From an executive at a technology company, she now found herself at the center of a conspiracy involving advanced science, high-level corruption, and a dog with almost supernatural abilities. The hospital corridor seemed strangely silent as she and Guardian headed to the exit. Sarah knew that from that moment on, every step they took could be monitored by invisible enemies. But with Guardian by her side, she felt an inexplicable confidence. As they entered the elevator, Sarah whispered to her canine companion, "Where are we going now, Guardian? What's the next step in this dangerous game?" The dog's eyes shone with an almost human intelligence, and Sarah had the strange sensation that somehow he knew exactly what to do. The elevator's descent seemed to mark the beginning of a journey that would change not only their lives, but potentially the fate of many others. The cold night air hit Sarah as soon as she and Guardian left the hospital. The city seemed different now, as if each shadow might hide an imminent danger. Guardian walked beside her, alert and determined. "Where to, friend?" Sarah whispered, feeling strangely comfortable talking to the dog as if he could answer. As if understanding, Guardian began to walk, guiding Sarah through less busy streets. After a few minutes, they reached a narrow alley where the dog stopped abruptly, sniffing the air. Sarah looked around, confused. "What are we doing here?" At that moment, a figure emerged from the shadows. Sarah instinctively stepped back, but Guardian remained calm. "You must be Sarah," said the figure, revealing herself as a middle-aged woman with grey hair. "My name is Dr. Linda Wilson. I worked with Dr. Parker on Project Sentinel. Sarah was dumbfounded. How? How did you know we would be here? Linda smiled, looking at Guardian. Let's say we have our methods of communication. Come, it's not safe to stay out here. They followed Linda to an old building nearby. In the basement, they found an improvised laboratory filled with high-tech equipment. Welcome to our hideout, said Linda, closing the door behind them. This is where we continue Dr. Parker's work, away from the Circle's eyes. Sarah looked around, amazed. In one corner, she saw other dogs, similar to Guardian, all watching her with the same intelligence in their eyes. So, there are more of them, Sarah murmured. Linda nodded. Yes, but Guardian is special. He was the first complete success of the project, capable not only of enhanced intelligence, but also of a deeper telepathic connection with chosen humans. Sarah turned to Guardian, who was looking at her intensely. Is that why I sometimes feel like I can understand? Him! Exactly, confirmed Linda. But there's more. Guardian possesses in his DNA the key to unlocking the full potential of Project Sentinel. That's why the Circle wants him so desperately. Sarah frowned. But why were my father and I chosen? Linda sighed, sitting in front of a computer. Dr. Parker knew he needed someone with influence and integrity to expose the Circle. Your father was chosen for his position in the company and his unblemished reputation. You, Sarah, were Guardian's choice. My choice? Sarah asked, looking at the dog. Linda smiled. The dogs of Project Sentinel have a unique ability to identify people with the necessary qualities for this mission. Guardian saw something in you, Sarah, something that could be crucial for the success of this plan. Sarah felt the weight of responsibility fall on her shoulders. And what exactly is the plan? Linda stood up, walking to a large map on the wall. We need to gather concrete evidence of the Circle's activities and expose them to the public. But more than that, we need to protect the technology of Project Sentinel. In the wrong hands, it could be catastrophic. Guardian barked softly, drawing everyone's attention. He approached one of the computers and, to Sarah's astonishment, began typing with his muzzle on a specially designed keyboard. On the screen, a message appeared. Next target, Central Laboratory. Tonight. Linda turned, pale. My God, they're going to attack the main laboratory. If they gain access to the servers there, they'll have everything they need to replicate the project, completed Sarah, understanding the gravity of the situation. Linda nodded gravely. Exactly. And with that, they could create an army of super-intelligent animals under their control. Sarah felt a shiver run down her spine. The idea of the Circle having access to such power was terrifying. What can we do? We need to stop them, said Linda, her voice firm. And for that we're going to need all the help we can get. Guardian typed again. Team ready, awaiting orders. Sarah looked at the other dogs in the laboratory, all alert and apparently ready for action. It was surreal, but she was beginning to understand the true potential of Project Sentinel. All right, said Sarah, feeling a determination grow within her. What's the plan? Linda smiled, impressed with the young woman's courage. First, we need to alert your father and ensure his safety. Then we'll infiltrate the central laboratory before the Circle gets there. Sarah nodded, her mind already working on the possibilities. We can use my corporate access to enter the laboratory without raising suspicions. Excellent, agreed Linda. Meanwhile, our canine team can position themselves strategically around the perimeter. Guardian barked in approval, his eyes shining with determination. Sarah took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the mission ahead. So that's it. We're about to face one of the most powerful and secret organizations in the world, with the help of super-intelligent dogs. Linda placed a hand on Sarah's shoulder. It sounds crazy, I know, but remember, sometimes the greatest changes in history begin with something that seems impossible. Sarah looked at Guardian, who returned her gaze with unwavering confidence. At that moment, she knew that no matter what happened, she wasn't alone in this battle. Let's do this, said Sarah, her voice full of determination. Let's expose the Circle and protect Project Sentinel at all costs. As the group began to outline the details of their bold plan, the clock continued to advance relentlessly. The night promised to be long and dangerous, but for Sarah, Guardian, and their new allies, it was just the beginning of a journey that could change the course of history. Night was falling over the city when Sarah, Guardian, and Dr. Linda's team positioned themselves around the central laboratory. The imposing glass and steel building, normally a symbol of technological progress, now seemed like a fortress about to be invaded. Sarah adjusted her earpiece, testing the communication with the team. "Everyone in position? Alpha Team ready," responded Linda from her improvised command post in a van parked nearby. "K9 Team on alert," came Guardian's digital response, transmitted through a special device developed by Dr. Linda's team. Sarah took a deep breath, feeling the weight of responsibility. She never imagined she would be at the center of such a crucial and dangerous operation. "All right, let's begin." With Guardian at her side, Sarah approached the main entrance of the laboratory. Her executive badge still worked, allowing them access to the building without raising immediate suspicions. "We're in," whispered Sarah into the communicator. "Great," responded Linda. "Head to the 15th floor. That's where the main servers are." As the elevator ascended, Sarah couldn't help but notice Guardian's calmness. The dog seemed perfectly at ease, as if infiltrating a high-security laboratory was something routine for him. Upon reaching the 15th floor, they found the corridors surprisingly empty. "Something's wrong," Sarah murmured. "There should be at least a few security guards around here." As if in response to her observation, Guardian began to growl softly, his eyes fixed on a point at the end of the corridor. "Linda," Sarah whispered urgently, "I think we're not alone here." Before Linda could respond, the lights suddenly went out, plunging the floor into darkness. Sarah felt Guardian press against her leg, alert and protective. "Sarah, be careful," Linda's voice sounded alarmed on the communicator. "We detected movement on your floor. It seems the circle arrived before us." Sarah's heart raced. They were trapped on a dark floor, potentially surrounded by enemies. But before panic could set in, she felt a strange calmness emanating from Guardian. "Don't worry," Guardian's digital voice sounded in her ear. "I can see in the dark. Follow me." Sarah placed a hand on Guardian's fur, letting him guide her through the dark corridor. They moved silently, avoiding obstacles that Sarah could barely discern. Suddenly, Guardian stopped. Sarah held her breath, hearing footsteps approaching. Low voices echoed through the corridor. "Quick in here," Guardian's voice sounded again, guiding Sarah to a side room. They had barely entered when two figures passed by the door, carrying flashlights. Sarah recognized one of the voices with a start. It was Victor Reynolds. "We have to hurry," Victor was saying. "Once we have the data, we can recreate Project Sentinel in our own facilities." Sarah felt a wave of anger. The man who had tried to eliminate her father was now about to steal a technology that could change the world. "Linda," Sarah whispered into the communicator. "Victor is here. They're heading to the server room. We have to stop them." "Understood," responded Linda. "The K9 team is on the way. Stay hidden until they arrive." Sarah looked at Guardian in the dim light. Even in the darkness, she could feel the determination emanating from him. "We have to do something," she murmured. Guardian nodded, his eyes shining in the darkness. He moved to a panel on the wall, using his muzzle to press a series of buttons. Suddenly, the lights came on and a strident alarm began to sound throughout the floor. "What's happening?" came Victor's alarmed shout. Sarah smiled, impressed with Guardian's astuteness. "Good work, friend." Chaos ensued on the floor. Sarah and Guardian left their hiding place, running toward the server room. On the way, they met the K9 team, 5 dogs as impressive as Guardian, each equipped with advanced technological devices. Upon reaching the server room, they found Victor and his accomplice desperately trying to access the main computers. "It's over, Victor," declared Sarah, her voice firm. Victor turned around, his eyes widening upon seeing Sarah and the group of super-intelligent dogs. How is this possible?" At that moment, the doors opened again, and a group of security guards entered, led by Dr. Linda. "Police on the way," announced Linda. "It's over, Victor. The circle has fallen." As Victor and his accomplice were detained, Sarah knelt beside Guardian, hugging him tightly. "We did it, friend, we did it." Guardian barked softly, his eyes shining with what could only be described as pride and relief. Linda approached, smiling. "You two were incredible, but this is just the beginning. We have a lot of work ahead to ensure that Project Sentinel is used for good." Sarah nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility, but also an excitement for the future. "We're ready," she said, looking at Guardian. "Aren't we, partner?" Guardian's confident bark was all the answer she needed. As police sirens approached, Sarah knew that her life had changed forever. With Guardian at her side and a clear mission ahead, she was ready to face any challenge the future might bring. The night that had begun with danger and uncertainty ended with a crucial victory. But, as Linda had said, it was just the beginning of a much greater journey. The weeks following the operation at the Central Laboratory were a whirlwind of events. The exposure of the circle caused an earthquake in the high echelons of government and the corporate world. Investigations were opened, arrests were made, and the media talked of nothing else. At the center of this storm, Sarah found herself assuming a role she had never imagined. With her father still recovering, she became the unofficial spokesperson for Project Sentinel, working tirelessly to ensure that the truth was revealed and the technology used ethically. On a sunny morning, Sarah found herself in her new office at the company headquarters, now restructured and free from the Circle's corrupt influence. Guardian, as always, was by her side, comfortably lying in a specially designed bed for him. "Another busy day ahead, friend," Sarah sighed, looking at her packed schedule. Guardian raised his head, his intelligent eyes fixed on her. Through the communication device he now constantly wore, his digital voice sounded, "We're doing the right thing, Sarah. The world needs to understand the potential and risks of this technology." Sarah smiled, still amazed at the depth of conversations she could have with Guardian. "You're right. It's just that sometimes it seems overwhelming." At that moment, the office door opened and Richard entered, leaning slightly on a cane. His face, although still marked by the recent ordeal, carried a proud smile. "Good morning, daughter. Good morning, Guardian," he greeted, sitting in front of Sarah's desk. "Dad, I wasn't expecting to see you here today," Sarah exclaimed, surprised and happy. Richard laughed softly. "I couldn't stay at home knowing that today is the big day, the press conference that will change everything." Sarah nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility. In a few hours she would be before the cameras, revealing to the world the complete truth about Project Sentinel and its implications for the future of humanity. "I'm nervous," she admitted. "What if people aren't ready for this? What if fear overcomes reason?" Guardian stood up, placing his head in Sarah's lap. "You're the right person to do this, Sarah. Your compassion and integrity are what the world needs to understand and accept this new reality." Richard smiled, still impressed with the dog's wisdom. "Guardian is right, daughter. You were chosen for a reason. Trust yourself." Sarah breathed deeply, feeling strengthened by the support of her father and her faithful companion. "You're right, let's do this." The following hours passed in a blur of final preparations and rehearsals. Before Sarah realized, she was standing before a packed room of journalists, cameras everywhere, broadcasting live to the entire world. With Guardian faithfully seated at her side, Sarah began her speech. "Ladies and gentlemen, today we are here to reveal a truth that will forever change the way we see the world and our relationship with other species." As Sarah spoke, explaining the details of Project Sentinel, the ethical implications, the risks, and the incredible possibilities that were opening up, she could feel the atmosphere in the room change. The initial skepticism gave way to fascination, and then to understanding of the magnitude of what was being revealed. Guardian, in a carefully planned moment, demonstrated his abilities, answering complex questions from journalists and even solving advanced mathematical equations in real time. The world watched astonished, as the barrier between humans and animals was redefined before their eyes. At the end of the conference, Sarah concluded, This is just the beginning of a new era. An era of mutual understanding, of collaboration between species. Before us, we have the potential to solve some of humanity's greatest challenges, from curing diseases to restoring ecosystems. But with this power comes enormous responsibility. It is our duty to ensure that this technology is used ethically, for the benefit of all living beings on this planet. When the cameras finally turned off, Sarah felt a wave of relief and accomplishment. She looked at Guardian, who was staring at her with what could only be described as pride. "You were incredible," Guardian's digital voice sounded in her ear. Richard approached, hugging his daughter with tears in his eyes. "You changed the world today, Sarah. I'm so proud of you." As they left the auditorium, Sarah reflected on the amazing journey that had brought her here. From an executive focused only on corporate results, she had become the guardian of a technology that could reshape Earth's future. Looking at Guardian, she smiled. "And to think it all started with a mysterious dog saving me from an accident." Guardian wagged his tail, his eyes shining with a mixture of intelligence and affection. "Sometimes, Sarah, the greatest heroes come in the most unexpected forms." As they walked together out of the building, facing the camera flashes and the buzz of the crowd, Sarah knew that this was just the beginning. A new chapter was opening, not only in her life but in human history. And with Guardian by her side, she was ready to face any challenge the future might bring. 1 year had passed since the historic press conference that revealed Project Sentinel to the world. The impact of that revelation still reverberated throughout the planet, transforming paradigms in various areas of society. Sarah observed the city from atop the new Advanced Research Center, a state-of-the-art complex dedicated to the ethical study and development of Sentinel technology. At her side, as always, was Guardian. "It's amazing how everything has changed in such a short time," Sarah reflected, her voice mixing admiration and a touch of concern. Guardian, now equipped with an even more advanced communication device, responded, "Change always brings challenges, Sarah, but look at how much we've already accomplished." And indeed, the accomplishments were remarkable. Rescue teams now counted on super-intelligent dogs, capable of locating survivors in disasters with incredible precision. In the medical field, monkeys with enhanced intelligence assisted in complex surgeries, while dolphins helped in the rehabilitation of patients with neurological trauma. In the field of environmental conservation, elephants and gorillas endowed with amplified intelligence had become tireless guardians of threatened forests, using their new capacity to coordinate preservation efforts. But it wasn't all roses. The integration of superintelligent animals into society brought complex ethical and legal issues. Heated debates about animal rights, limits of technology, and the very concept of humanity occupied the headlines almost daily. "Sometimes I wonder if we did the right thing," Sarah confessed, turning to Guardian. The dog looked at her with his wise eyes. "Doubt is part of progress, Sarah. What matters is how we handle it." At that moment, Richard entered the room carrying a tablet. Even after a year, seeing her father fully recovered and active still warmed Sarah's heart. "I have news," announced Richard, his tone a mixture of enthusiasm and caution. "The UN has finally reached an agreement on the Treaty of Rights and Responsibilities for Enhanced Species." Sarah took the tablet, her eyes quickly scanning the document. "This is revolutionary and necessary," added Guardian. "It establishes an ethical foundation for our coexistence." The treaty was, in fact, a historic landmark. It recognized enhanced animals as sentient beings with specific rights, while establishing rigorous guidelines for the use and development of Sentinel technology. "There's one more thing," said Richard, a smile forming on his face. "The Nobel Committee has been in touch. They want to award the Peace Prize to you and Guardian, as symbols of this new era of cooperation between species." Sarah was dumbfounded, looking at Guardian, who seemed as surprised as she was. "Us? But—" "You deserve it," Richard insisted. "It was you who made all this possible." Guardian approached Sarah, resting his head on her hand. "We accept this honor not for ourselves, but for what it represents for the future." Sarah nodded, emotional. You're right, as always. As the sun set on the horizon, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, Sarah reflected on the incredible journey she had lived. From an unexpected encounter on a rainy night to a global revolution, each step had been crucial in shaping this new world. "You know," she said, looking at Guardian and her father, "when all this began, I was so focused on saving the company, on unraveling the conspiracy. I never imagined we would be here, reshaping the very fabric of society." Richard smiled, placing his hand on his daughter's shoulder. "The greatest changes often begin with the smallest acts of courage." Guardian barked softly in agreement. "And this is just the beginning of our journey, Sarah. There is much more to be done, many challenges to be faced." Sarah looked once more at the city below, now illuminated by the twilight lights. A world of possibilities opened before them, a future where humans and animals could work side by side to create a better planet for all species. "You're right, Guardian," she said, a new determination in her voice. "This is just the beginning, and together there's nothing we can't achieve." Night fell over the city. Sarah, Richard, and Guardian remained together, contemplating the future they had helped create. A future of hope, challenges, and infinite possibilities. And so, with hearts full of expectation and spirits strengthened by overcome trials, they prepared for the next chapter of their extraordinary journey. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope that the story of Sarah and Guardian has touched your hearts and expanded your horizons. To continue exploring the exciting possibilities of this new world, we've prepared a special playlist with equally captivating stories about the coexistence of humans and super-intelligent animals. Find it here by clicking on the left. If this narrative has sparked your imagination, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give a like to the video. Every day, we bring unique stories that explore the complexities and wonders of life. In all its forms, don't miss our upcoming content. The future is full of stories waiting to be told. Let us know in the comments, how do you imagine living in a world where animals and humans can communicate and collaborate on equal footing? Your ideas might be the inspiration for our next great adventure.